Hey guys, Steve Moran here with another episode of Foresight TV. It has been a crazy, wacky week. Earlier this week I left the Bahamas at the Senior Living Innovation Forum, running from a hurricane to Seattle, and had best laid plans to be able to be here. And so I'm a little discombobulated. And the other thing is that if I get a little teary today, I realized when I was sitting in the airport to come home that today's my dad's birthday, and a lot of you will know. Maddie, you might not know this, but he passed away about 6 or 7 months ago, and it just really hit me. I think I'll be okay, but if that happens, it's not because you made me cry, Maddie. But Maddie's got a brand new book she's working on that is really crazy, wonderful. But before we get started, I'm going to run this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Maddie, welcome. Let's start by just talking a little bit about who you are, what you do, what your passion is.
Sure. You want me to tell you, or are you going to tell everyone?
I want you to tell me.
Okay. Well, I've been on this beat for a really long time, about a little more than 35 years, looking at the whole aging, longevity, digging deep into retirement, and with a big focus on women. I feel like in these areas, there's a lot of general information, but let's face it, women live longer than men. So I've really enjoyed digging deep into that particular segment of the population, although I do the rest of it as well. Also, I write for the Wall Street Journal. I'm a regular blogger on the Retirement Expert Panel, and I've written 3 books. Working on my new book, which as you mentioned or alluded to, again, I'm still working on it. And it's going to be called Ageless Aging, and it's going to be targeted to 50 plus women. So that's a little bit about me.
Terrific. So I think that right now, I mean, as you know, you're digging into this, and we spend a lot of time talking about what the aging process is. I have a friend of mine who just published a blog article saying that it's time to get ready for Senior Living 2.0. And when I was at the Senior Living Innovation Forum in the Bahamas, there was a lot of talk about what the future of senior living is going to be. And we're close to the same age. I know you're not supposed to do this, but I think you've got a couple of years on me, but not very many. And so I'm starting to see a lot of my friends who are either retired or can hardly wait to retire. And I'll be honest with you, that doesn't resonate with me very much. I think I've got a lot to do, but I think that different people choose different paths. And so as you sort of look at this new, you and Ken have talked about this age wave. It's the name of your company. What do you see? What do you see retirement being like? And I use the word retirement with some hesitancy.
Yeah, well, that's smart to use that hesitancy around retirement. Let me create some context around this, okay? For one thing, when Ken recently did a bunch of interviews that ended up appearing in the Sages of Aging, almost every single one of these so-called sages, who are people who've been in the field of aging for decades and are at top of the food chain, they all said, no, it's not about aging. Aging is a lifelong process. It begins in the womb and it goes until the day you die. So aging is one thing, that's the process. But then there's longevity, and we're all experiencing longevity, and it's a new kind of longevity. Keep in mind that just about 100 years ago, average life expectancy was only 47. So with breakthroughs that have happened in sanitation and healthcare and prevention, what we've seen happen is skyrocketing longevity, with women outliving men by about 6 years. So this longevity went from 47 all the way up to, on average, 77. I hear your dog in the back.
Yeah, I barely said hello. I hate to do this when I'm on a live stream, but I'm actually going to open the door so he can see me.
Oh, please
I think he'll
do.
do
He
better.
sounds adorable.
Yeah. Come here, puppy. He's
So,
a big 100-pound yellow lab. So anyway,
aw. Anyway,
he's
so it's about
he hasn't seen me
longevity.
for a week. He probably needs to go outside, and I'm the
Oh,
only one home.
I love
So
dogs.
anyway, lay down, puppy. There we go. Good
So we're
boy.
talking about longevity, and it really is a longevity revolution, the skyrocketing longevity. And so in that context, we're talking about retirement. So think about it. The whole concept of retirement was put into place back by Otto von Bismarck back in the 1880s, when average life expectancy was about 47, and he chose the number 65, that's where retirement should take place. So obviously, it wasn't meant to be for too many people, because very few people live that long. So if we were to use that same formula today, we would choose the retirement age as being somewhere in the early 90s. So I'm not suggesting you do
Wow.
that. But what you can see is that there's sort of a disconnect. I mean, the average retiree spends 20 years in retirement. That's a long time. And it's hard to try to figure out, well, what am I going to do with my time? What's my sense of purpose? How am I going to take care of my health? And how am I going to afford to live on a fixed income for 20, 30, some people even 40 years? That's a new game. So, Steve, you're making a good choice by not wanting to stop working. So, I also think that there's like this blurred line now. We used to think of retirement as the day you stop working. Not anymore. So many people like you, Steve, are choosing to work in retirement. So that's a whole new concept, that work and retirement, which used to be the opposites, are now blending together.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because we in senior living, as I know we have a huge workforce crisis. We just don't have enough people.
That's right.
And there's sort of this hope by many in the industry that something is going to change in the government to allow for more immigration as a way to relieve that pressure. There are others of us, this includes me, who just don't think that, regardless of whether that's a good idea, this isn't a political statement, that on either side of the political party, there's not much appetite to change, mostly because they'd rather fight about it than fix any kind of problems at all. But Kramer, from who founded Nick and now is the head of Nexus Insights, he has suggested that perhaps the answer to the labor shortage in senior living is actually encore careers for older people. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think that this is an underpaid workforce and an underappreciated workforce, and we need to do something about that. And I'm not in the industry per se, but that is
Right.
something that does need to be addressed. And then I think the idea of having healthy older workers working part-time and flex time and doing job sharing, come in and caring for other elders who aren't so lucky to have their health and well-being quite as much as these healthy, maybe even younger elders, is a great idea, a really great idea. Keep in mind that if you're talking about people living all the way through their 70s into their 80s and 90s, what is the average age in senior living? 80 something, I think it is.
Yeah, it's high 80s, and it depends on what level of care. I was talking to somebody who opened a new community, and a life plan community, and their
Yeah.
average age is like 72, 73. I was at Margaritaville Latitudes about 4 or 5 months ago, which is just it's a crazy, interesting concept. It's not really senior living, but you might call it senior living. But their average age is only like 63. And I think across all their systems, they're sort of entering ages more like 62. And again, I look at Margaritaville and I'm thinking, 30 years of partying. I'm not, no judgment there. 'Cause
A
I have
lot
some
of
things I
drinking.
really look forward to, but I'm thinking I probably, my liver couldn't survive that.
Yeah, we
So,
were recently in Bradenton, Florida, and Margaritaville actually has a hotel there. And somebody suggested we stay there, and we thought, great idea. And so we tried it out, and we were like kind of shocked. It was people in their 50s and 60s and even 70s, and they were definitely partying, having
yeah.
a great old time.
Yeah. So I want to actually dig into your book, the book that you're writing, and you're looking at longevity, particularly from the perspective of a woman. I do know that there's been some suggestion, and you're really the expert on this, so maybe it's not true, but my sense is there's some thinking that this life expectancy gap of about 7 years that we've seen between men and women is starting to shrink as more women are in the workplace and they live more stressful lives. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, a few years ago, I would have said, yeah, there's something there. But because of COVID, we've seen kind of a transformation around this. It used to be that women outlive men by about 4 to 5 years. During COVID, that grew. Now women outlive men by about 6 years. But although men die quicker, women get sicker. Our health spans just don't match our lifespans. And that's what I want to address. I want to talk about like what can women do to not just live long, but live well.
So this is real. I think this is really important. So how do we do that? I mean, it's a big issue inside senior living, right? Is how do you actually create a healthier environment? And I hadn't really thought about it in that context, but this idea that women live longer, but they live less healthy.
Yeah.
That's almost, if I were a woman, it depresses me as a man. And I was thinking as a woman, I'd be more depressed by it. So what is it fixable?
Uh, I think it is fixable, but let me just address what you just said. I think it's both a man's challenge and a woman's challenge because in our society, men and women do relate to one another. Sometimes they're in partnership or marriage, but you have friends and loved ones that you care about of both genders. And so I think that it affects everyone. So that's one thing. I also think that women could probably help men do a better job in attaining more longevity. And these two things are very much linked. So let me begin by trying to address this in terms of senior living, because there is an effect there. And that is that there's this whole concept in our ecosystem, in the world at large, of it's okay to be ageist. So racism and sexism and religious isms, those are not socially acceptable anymore. But somehow ageism is. And by the way, the worst people who are ageist, I don't know if I'm not saying that correctly, but people who are older adults are actually the most ageist. We'll make statements like, oh, I'm having a senior moment. So what does that mean? I mean, just because you're getting older, does that mean you're losing your memory? Well, that's not necessarily the case. So I think addressing this ageism issue and taking a more positive point of view about our own aging or longevity is a very fundamental underpinning that can be addressed, by the way, in senior living. And Becca Levy at Yale has done studies on this. And what she has learned through her research is that having a positive attitude about aging, it actually can affect how many years you live. So that's an amazing thing.
So how do I, as somebody who's getting older, and I'm gonna start by saying that in some sense this is really hard for me because I have a pretty positive, I'm having the time of my life and what I'm doing. I'm making the world a better place every day. I've been to 20 something conferences this year.
Wow.
I've got one more to go to next week. And I just, I think maybe the better question to ask is if I'm in a senior living community, I'm running an organization where perhaps we're, as an industry, very ageist in how we treat people who are residents. How do we actually maybe start by shifting our own mindset as people who are working in the communities? And then how do we help residents have a better appreciation for what they've still got ahead?
Okay, well, let me address that and then also talk about some of the other
Great.
things that affect our aging, and they all work together. I think that there's this kind of holistic recipe that includes our attitudes on aging, what we put in our mouth, our food, our exercise, our sleep patterns. And you alluded to it when you talked about yourself, our sense of purpose, our sense of family and community, our finances. These things all work together and all affect each other. Just as an example, one of the great things about senior living is that there's community. That's a fantastic thing. But during COVID, we got to see a lot of older adults feeling really alone, really isolated. And there's been studies that show us that feeling isolation and loneliness is the equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of your health. So that's a scary thing.
It is. It's shocking. It really is. So let's actually dig a little bit into sort of this holistic view. Can you sort of give us some examples of things that we can do either for ourselves or maybe to help our residents?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about kind of the easiest entry point, and that is exercise. I mean, you can have walking clubs. You can have, there's this movement that Katie Bowman heads up called the movement. And what she talks about really is this whole idea of functional movement. So rather than doing things for some of the residents, maybe you can assist them in starting to do them for themselves. So picking up something that falls to the floor may be hard at first, but if you can assist people so that they don't fall and hurt themselves, maybe they can develop those muscles so that they can better do that. Chair yoga. There's all kinds of little things that you can do to really help your residents sort of catch the virus of wanting to exercise, because once you catch that virus, you don't want to stop exercising. I mean, using myself as an example, if I don't exercise, I don't feel well. I mean, I start to feel like kind of my energy level goes down pretty dramatically. So that's a great entry point. Another easy thing to do, well, I don't know how easy it is, but that you can do as people who actually run senior residences has to do with the food. Making sure that get rid of the ultra processed foods. I mean, they're just not good for you. And you may love eating them, but once they're out of your diet for a short period of time, like 2 weeks, let's say, you don't miss them anymore. And you can replace them with healthier versions of what those things are. So changing the diet in that way. Another thing, Michael Pollan always says that, which I love because it's so simple. He said, eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. So not everybody's going to do exactly that, but if you can sort of move people in that direction, they're going to start feeling better so that it's easier for them to pick up that thing they might have dropped on the floor, easier for them to feel positive about their aging, and can make them feel like maybe sleeping a little bit better, because sleep has a lot to do with it. We want to get between 6 and 7 hours of sleep a night, and we want to get that REM sleep. So that means creating a quiet environment for sleep, maybe playing some AI created music and making it available for the residents. I know that I use a app for myself because I used to have a lot of trouble sleeping. And it's because my mind was racing at night. So I listen to this music that's AI created and it adapts to me. I don't know how, but it somehow does. And it not only puts me to sleep, but keeps me sleeping. So that's something. Another thing that
Really?
you could do is the sense of purpose. You alluded to it in your own life. but it's really something that I'm sure residents would want. Maybe it's as simple as taking care of a plant or a dog, like your dog.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's something like putting together a volunteer program to help children once a week learn how to read, something like that. So there's a lot of, I mean, that's just a few examples.
So I want to actually talk a little bit about a couple of these things specifically. The first is, let's talk a little bit more about exercise and um, how much exercise do I need a week? Does it matter whether it's indoor, outdoor? Any research thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, I think people love being outdoors. So it's not like it's necessarily going to improve your exercise capacity, but the having a sense of nature and going outside makes people feel good. And again, it's that positive vibe you want to get going on with older adults, with everyone really, but with older adults specifically when we're talking about this senior resident. So I would, wherever possible, take a walk in nature. I'm sure many of the residencies in the senior living world have beautiful walkways and fountains and greenery. You could even, for instance, create a vegetable garden where residents could take part in the planting. I mean, that would be super fun. But as far as what people say, it's a little complicated, but I'll try to break it down. There's 5 different things you need to do as you get older in terms of exercise. One we're all very familiar with, and that's about the cardio health, the trying to have endurance. And maybe that's as simple as walking every day for 30 minutes. That's something that a lot of people enjoy doing, or swimming, or biking, or just doing something active that creates a sense of endurance. Then, as you get older, we lose our muscle mass. No matter who you are, once you start hitting the age of 50, you lose muscle mass. And the only way to build that back up is through strength training. So I'm sure most of the senior living residencies have places within their facilities where people can do strength training. And if you do it 3 times a week for just a short amount of time, you're going to feel better, you're going to look better, and you're going to really stop the muscle mass loss, which is, you definitely want to do it. Then there's this whole idea of balance. So balance would be the third thing. Now, we all know if you don't have balance and you don't have muscle mass, your likelihood of falling and maybe breaking a hip really increase. You don't want to have that happen. So if you go online, there's this thing called the flamingo test, which is basically a yoga pose. Holding that for, building up to holding it on each side of your body for 10 seconds, you're going to have great balance. That's not so hard to do. Takes 20 seconds a day. So what am I forgetting here?
We've got 3 so far. We've got cardio, strength, and balance, and there are 5,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, there are 5 altogether. Then there's also flexibility. Maybe there's only 4. I think there's only 4. There's flexibility. Flexibility is very important because you don't want to feel all stiff and tight. And so doing some stretches in the morning, I mean, that would, for 5 or 10 minutes every morning, just to wake up. I mean, waking up your shoulders and waking up your back. These things are really important, making sure that you can touch your toes. And if you can't do it to begin with, build up to it. So the whole idea is that at any age, you can improve and get better.
Yeah, I just this is so important. Of course, I feel like you've given me just a big indictment of me right now, particularly over the last couple of weeks. I actually do the walking part, I do a pretty good job on. And I probably, the balance stuff, the strength training is probably the thing I need, and the stretching are probably the 2 things that I really need to hit.
So
Um,
you should do it with a friend. I mean, that would make it fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I'm coming off of 5 weeks of travel where it's been the
Oh, yeah.
worst, right? And the food's been terrible. I mean, the food's been good or maybe too good, right? And the exercise has been too little. And so I'm actually anxious to getting back and doing more of that. Um, let's talk a little bit about purpose. I mean, what does purpose look like? And how much time a week do I need for it to be beneficial? Can I get too obsessed by something?
Yeah, of course you can. I'm too obsessed with work, just to give you a great example. But it really gets me going every day.
Yeah.
Purpose is an interesting thing because there's purpose with a big P and purpose with a little p. And talking about purpose with a little p, that may be taking care of your dog. Or, as I mentioned earlier, a plant. It doesn't have to be something grandiose. It's just something that gives you a reason to wake up every morning. And it's not something that's, in a time schedule. It's just something you really care about. Visiting your grandchildren, making a new friend. I mean, my sister-in-law, for instance, what gives her purpose, and she doesn't work, is that she runs a book group and she is continuously researching what are the best books. She actually has a library training background, and she loves doing that. And then she gathers groups of women together. It could be co-ed. But in her instance, it's women, and they discuss it. They oftentimes will bring in someone she lives in the San Diego area, from the university to lead the group so that they're all being intellectually stimulated, which gives you a sense of purpose. They're reading, which all these women feel very passionate about, and they're getting to spend time with friends. They oftentimes will open a bottle of wine, have some lunch. I mean, they turn it into an enjoyable experience. So purpose doesn't have to be something grandiose, although for some people it is. Some people, they can't wait to retire, not to just hang out and go to the beach and play golf, but because they want to start, let's say, a nonprofit, or they really care about getting into the schools and volunteering their time, or there's a cause that they really passionately want to get involved with. That I would call purpose with a big P. And it's not something that's structured necessarily for a particular amount of time every week. You do it because you love it.
So what about things like, I don't know, golf or crossword puzzles, or what's the new hit, Wordle?
Wordle.
Is that purpose?
If you enjoy doing it and it gives you a sense of a reason to get up in the morning, yes. But does it affect your brain capacity and your ability to hold on to your memory? Not quite as much as you might think, because most people I know who do Wordle, and it's not that easy. I mean, I've tried it with my son. We have some fun with it once in a while. But if you do it all the time, your brain is trained to do that. The idea of brain training and holding on to your memory has to do with learning new things. So those are a little bit different, but yes, gives you a sense of purpose. No, it's not going to help your memory necessarily.
Okay, well, I'm not a Wordle person at all because even though I make my living as a writer, I can't spell at all. And so, it was like God invented spell checking and Word documents for me. One of the things we didn't really touch on, you touched on just briefly, but I'd like to maybe dig into a little bit
Yeah.
deeper, is the sense of community and friendship and where that all plays in this.
Yeah, first of all, it's harder for people as they get older to make new friends. So there's a lot of attention being put on, reigniting sometimes or strengthening the relationships you have. So you don't need to have tons and tons of friends, but sometimes it's kind of nice to have new friends also. And a lot of people are beginning to pay attention to this idea of, well, maybe it would be a good idea to have a friend from a different generation. So, for instance, I have a very good friend who now I already said I was 72. Um, she's 40 and she's a very close friend of mine, and we enjoy a lot of the same things, and we have some work connections that really help cement the relationship even closer, and we're even on a board together, and we just love going out and having dinner together, and it gives me some friendship time away from my family, away from my other friends. And I've learned so much from her. I mean, she really understands tech, and if I have a tech question,
Yeah.
she's my go-to person.
So yeah, and I it's interesting. I find that particularly because I travel so much, many of my friends are work friends, but I honestly, they're
Mhm.
mostly quite a bit. They're probably 10 to 20 years younger than I am.
That's great.
And and I have a few old sort of high school, college friends, but not many of the few of those, but not many of those. So your book is going to be primarily a recipe for women to live their best from 50 on?
Okay, well, I'm hoping that younger women pick it up also, because the earlier you get started on looking at these things and taking them seriously, the better. My daughter's 35, and I was explaining to her and and some of her friends what the book was about. And they're like, well, I really want to read that book because I want to be well prepared for this 100-year life path, because chances are they're going to live to 100. So it is aimed at women, though.
Right.
And
What I love about this, I'm thinking, is my head sort of spinning on this, right? It would be so cool to get a bunch of copies of these books when it's out, and we'll talk about when that's going to happen in a minute. But I have this picture of doing book clubs inside senior living communities
oh, what
with
a
both
great idea.
women in the community, but the younger women who are working in there and creating relationships and talking about it and together building better, more powerful, meaningful lives. That'd be really cool.
I love the idea, Steve. Sign me up.
You bet. You bet. Well, you can, we'll find you a community and you can lead one down where you live.
Oh,
So
that would be so fun. I'd
that
enjoy
would be
that.
really cool to do. And I'm sort of looking at Jada, our production assistant, who you're not seeing, who's taking care of all the things behind the scene. And I think she's about 14. Well, she's a little bit older than that, but I'm trying to, come on, smile, Jada. And there we go. And I know you can't see her, but I'm thinking, even for somebody at her age, what it could do for her to have a much better life as she, as she's in her 20s and getting, being even our age, right, seems like a million miles away. But as
Right.
you and I know, it comes so fast.
It
Just,
does. And you're touching on an interesting thing, because from research that was done by McCann Worldwide, the advertising marketing company, which is I think it's the biggest advertising marketing company in the world. They did some research called The Truth About Aging. And what they found out was that younger people are far more concerned, worried, frightened, really, of aging than older adults are, which is an interesting thing. And when they showed younger adults examples of older women who were doing cool things, like maybe doing photography, or somebody had an Instagram account. One person was a photographer, all over the age of 60. They were like, yes, that really makes me feel good. Now it makes me feel like I have something to look forward to, not something to dread. And by the way, that dread, that's part of this whole ageism. It's a negative effect of ageism in our culture overall.
Well, and I think that one of the things that often gets missed by younger people is that if you actually look at happiness scales, right? People who are you probably know the numbers better than I do, but
Yeah.
something like their 60s to at least their mid 80s are sort of the happiest generation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
uh,
that's true. And it's not like generational, it's like actually based on age. Now, I'm not one of those people that think chronology defines you at all. I mean, I don't necessarily believe that. However, from studies that have been done at Stanford and at Yale, what they found is there's this U curve of happiness and life satisfaction that begins to go up in the late 50s and stays pretty high through the 70s. So it's good news for all of us.
It really is. It is. So, Maddy, we are about out of time, but I want to touch bases. When are we going to see your book?
Okay, good question. The hope is that Mother's Day 2024.
Terrific. And it will be a recipe for everybody, but particularly for women, to just live an amazing life. And so I am really excited about that. If you want to follow Maddy, you can do that on LinkedIn. Jada's put up the information, and you can see the Age Wave website there. Maddy, thank you very so much for joining us.
Steve.
I
Really
do want to say Happy Veterans Day to everybody. I should have said that at the start. We do appreciate the veterans. They've, sacrificed so much so that we can have the freedoms that we do have. So have a great weekend. And I'm looking forward to the book. When you have the book out, I'm of course going to want to have you back on again. And with that, we are going to say goodbye for this week.
Thank